The maid was humiliated and fired. But 20 years later, a young man identical to the millionaire showed up at her humble home. Chicago, 2005. The Mitchell mansion loomed against the steel-gray skyline, its Victorian architecture a stark contrast to the glass and concrete towers that surrounded it. Chloe Freeman stood at the wrought iron gates, her slender fingers clutching a worn letter of recommendation. At 25, she possessed a quiet beauty that seemed out of place amid the harsh winter wind whipping off Lake Michigan. "You gonna stand there all day? Or you coming in?" The security guard's gruff voice broke her reverie. He'd been watching her for 5 minutes. This slip of a woman with haunted eyes who looked too refined to be applying for a housekeeping position. Chloe straightened her second-hand coat. "Sorry." "Yes, I'm here to see Mrs. Jenkins about the housekeeping position." As she walked up the cobblestone path, Chloe's hand instinctively moved to the gold medallion hidden beneath her scarf. The only link to a past she couldn't remember. Her late Aunt Emily had given it to her, saying only that it was a family heirloom, to be kept close always. "Never take it off," Emily had whispered during her final days. "It matters more than you know." The massive oak door swung open before Chloe could knock, revealing a stern-faced woman in her 60s with iron-gray hair pulled into a tight bun. "Mrs. Jenkins?" Chloe asked. "You're late," the woman replied, checking her watch. "Punctuality is essential in this household. Mr. Mitchell runs his home with the same precision as his company's." "I apologize. The bus was delayed due to weather." Mrs. Jenkins scrutinized her from head to toe. "Very well, follow me." The interior of the mansion stole Chloe's breath. Marble floors gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers that cast prisms of light across mahogany-paneled walls. Oil paintings of stern-faced men, Mitchell patriarchs, she assumed, seemed to follow her movement with disapproving eyes. "You'll clean the West Wing Mondays and Thursdays, the East Wing Tuesdays and Fridays, Mrs. Jenkins explained as they climbed a sweeping staircase. "Wednesdays are for the library and Mr. Mitchell's study. Weekends are half days. Common areas only." Chloe nodded, mentally mapping the layout. "The family quarters are strictly off limits unless specifically requested. Mrs. Mitchell values her privacy above all else." The tour continued through endless corridors until they reached a small office where Mrs. Jenkins reviewed Chloe's application. "Your references are adequate," she said, "though I find it curious that someone with your apparent education seeks such a position." Chloe had prepared for this. "My aunt believed in education. Even when our circumstances were modest, she passed recently, and I need steady work." Before Mrs. Jenkins could respond, the office door opened, revealing a distinguished man in his mid-40s. Robert Mitchell carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd never known want. His dark hair was lightly touched with silver at the temples, and his eyes, a penetrating steel blue, immediately locked on Chloe. "Jenkins, have you seen the Westmore file? Susan insists she left it in my study, but..." He stopped, noticing Chloe. "I apologize for interrupting. Mr. Mitchell, this is Chloe Freeman, applying for the housekeeping position." Something flashed across his face. Surprise, perhaps recognition, but vanished so quickly Chloe wondered if she'd imagined it. "Miss Freeman," he extended his hand, his grip firm but not overpowering. "Welcome to our home." The moment their hands touched, Chloe felt an inexplicable jolt of familiarity, like a half-remembered dream, a flash of firelight behind her eyes, gone as quickly as it came. "Thank you, sir." "Robert, darling, are you hiding from me?" A razor-sharp voice cut through the air seconds before Susan Mitchell appeared, where Robert exuded quiet power. His wife radiated cold ambition, blonde, beautiful, and immaculately styled. She assessed Chloe with a single dismissive glance. "Not hiding, dear, just looking for that file." Robert's demeanor shifted subtly, a tightness appearing around his eyes. Susan barely acknowledged Chloe. "The new help, I presume. Make sure she understands the rules about the third-floor gallery. Nothing in there is to be touched, not even for dusting. I handle those artifacts personally." "Of course, Mrs. Mitchell," Mrs. Jenkins replied. Susan threaded her arm through her husband's possessively. "Andrew and his wife are coming for dinner tonight. Wear the blue tie I bought you. It matches my dress." She kissed his cheek, her eyes still coldly monitoring Chloe's reaction. After the Mitchells departed, Mrs. Jenkins continued the orientation. Mrs. Mitchell comes from old money, but not enough of it. The marriage was advantageous for both parties. Chloe wondered why the housekeeper was sharing such information, until she added, I tell you this so you understand your place here. Mrs. Mitchell guards what she considers hers with particular vigor. The warning was clear. For the next few weeks, Chloe learned the rhythms of the Mitchell household. She worked diligently, becoming nearly invisible as good household staff should be. Yet she often felt Robert's gaze following her when he thought no one was looking, not with lust, but with curious wonder, as though trying to solve a puzzle. One morning, while dusting the library, Chloe's medallion slipped from beneath her uniform as she hurriedly tucked it away. Walter, the elderly butler who'd served the Mitchell family for over 40 years, froze in the doorway, his rheumy eyes fixed on the golden piece. Where did you get that? His voice trembled. It was my aunt's, Chloe replied. Is something wrong? Walter's weathered face paled. No, nothing. He departed quickly, leaving Chloe puzzled by his reaction. That evening, passing Mr. Mitchell's study, Chloe overheard raised voices. I don't care what your investigators found. Robert, Susan hissed. Andrew says we need to move forward with the merger now. Andrew isn't the one signing over family assets, Robert countered. Something doesn't add up in the financials. You never had these concerns before. Is this about that girl? What girl? Don't play dumb, the new maid. I've seen how you look at her. Don't be ridiculous, Susan. Susan's laugh was brittle glass. She's convenient, isn't she? Pretty enough to fantasize about. Lowly enough to dismiss when you're done. Just like that interior designer last year, or your secretary before that. That's enough. I'm going to Aspen next weekend. Mother's birthday. Susan's voice turned honey-sweet. Perhaps the distance will clear your head. As Susan's high heels clicked down the hallway, Chloe quickly retreated, her heart pounding. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but Susan's insinuations troubled her deeply. Was Mr. Mitchell truly as predatory as his wife suggested? The thought disappointed her more than it should have. Later that night, Chloe stared at the medallion in her small apartment bathroom. The emblem showed a tree with deep roots and high branches, surrounded by Latin words she couldn't decipher. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered that the tree was significant, that it should mean something to her. But like the flashes of firelight in her recurring nightmares, the meaning remained just beyond her grasp, buried in a past she couldn't remember. The Friday of Susan's departure to Aspen arrived with an ominous forecast. Meteorologists warned of a severe storm system moving across the Midwest, with Chicago directly in its path. Dark clouds hung low over Lake Michigan, their underbellies purple-black with promised violence. Chloe checked the weather app on her outdated phone as she hurried toward the Mitchell mansion. She had extended her hours today. Mrs. Jenkins wanted the formal dining room prepared for a dinner party Robert was hosting the following week. Though Susan was leaving, the business of the Mitchell empire continued. Cutting it close, Walter commented as Chloe rushed through the service entrance, raindrops already speckling her coat. Sorry, bus delays again, she replied, hanging her damp outerwear in the small staff closet. Is Mrs. Mitchell gone yet? Walter nodded. Left an hour ago. Her flight barely made it out before they started grounding departures. He lowered his voice. Mr. Mitchell is in a state this morning. Been locked in his study since dawn. Best to stay clear. Chloe nodded, though curiosity prickled at her. What had caused Robert's distress? It couldn't be Susan's absence. Anyone could see their marriage existed only on paper. By mid-afternoon, the storm arrived in earnest. Wind howled around the mansion's eaves, rain lashing against leaded windows like liquid bullets. Thunder crashed so close it rattled the crystal in the cabinets Chloe was cleaning. Most of the staff had already left, Jenkins having dismissed them early due to the worsening conditions. Even Walter had departed, his arthritis flaring in the damp. Only Chloe remained, determined to finish the dining room. You're still here? Chloe startled, nearly dropping a Waterford goblet. Robert Mitchell stood in the doorway, his normally immaculate appearance in disarray. His tie hung loose around his unbuttoned collar, hair disheveled as though he'd been repeatedly running his hands through it. But it was his eyes that truly alarmed her, bloodshot and hollow with some profound distress. Mr. Mitchell, I didn't realize you were... Everyone's gone. His voice was hoarse. Yes, sir. Mrs. Jenkins sent the staff home early because of the storm. Chloe hesitated. I was just finishing up. Lightning flashed, illuminating Robert's face in stark white light, revealing a vulnerability she'd never seen in him before. In that fractured moment, he looked like a drowning man. Sir, are you all right? A bitter laugh escaped him. All right, no, Chloe, I don't believe I am. He stepped into the room, and she caught the unmistakable scent of expensive scotch. Have you ever discovered that your entire life is built on quicksand? That the people closest to you are strangers wearing familiar faces? Alarm bells rang in Chloe's mind. This was dangerous territory. Mr. Mitchell, perhaps I should... Robert? He interrupted. At least grant me the dignity of my first name as my world collapses. He pulled a leather portfolio from under his arm and tossed it onto the table. Documents spilled out. Financial statements, emails, photographs. Despite her better judgment, Chloe glanced at them. A photo showed Susan entwined with a dark-haired man in what appeared to be a hotel room. Other images documented clandestine meetings in restaurants, parking garages, private clubs. 5 years, Robert said, his voice hollow. 5 years she's been sleeping with Andrew, my business partner, my oldest friend. He laughed again, that same shattered sound. And that's not even the worst of it. Chloe knew she should leave immediately. This was precisely the scenario Mrs. Jenkins had warned against, finding herself alone with an emotionally volatile, intoxicated employer. Yet something in Robert's despair pinned her in place. The money transfers, he continued, gesturing vaguely at the financial documents. They've been siphoning funds from the company for years, setting up shell corporations, offshore accounts, planning for the day they'd push me out completely. Thunder cracked directly overhead. The mansion's lights flickered, then died, plunging them into a gray half-light, broken only by lightning flashes. Perfect, Robert muttered. Even the elements conspire against me tonight. I should find some candles, Chloe said, grateful for a reason to leave. This conversation had veered far beyond appropriate boundaries. Don't bother, Robert said, pulling out his phone and activating its flashlight. The backup generator should kick in shortly. He looked up at her, truly seeing her for perhaps the first time. You don't have to stay, Chloe. I shouldn't be burdening you with this. She should leave. She knew it. But a strange, inexplicable pull kept her rooted to the spot. It's pouring outside, sir. I can wait until the worst passes. As if in answer, a violent gust rattled the windows, rain streaming down the glass in undulating sheets. Join me for a drink, he asked, so unexpectedly that Chloe blinked in surprise. I promise I'm not making some tawdry pass. I just can't bear to be alone right now. Every logical part of her brain screamed to refuse. Yet some deeper instinct, the same one that sometimes woke her gasping from dreams of fire and faceless figures, drew her forward. One drink, she agreed cautiously. Agreed. They relocated to his study, where embers still glowed in the fireplace. Robert rekindled the flames, casting the room in warm, flickering light. He poured 2 glasses of amber liquid, handing one to Chloe. To disillusionment, he toasted grimly. The scotch burned Chloe's throat, warming her from within. Outside, the storm raged on, but in the firelit study, a strange intimacy grew between employer and employee. Robert spoke of his early idealism in business, his gradual realization that Susan had married him for his family's wealth and connections. Chloe shared carefully edited stories of her life with her aunt, their struggle after her parents' death, her dreams of someday returning to college. Neither noticed when the power returned, the electric lights remaining off as candles and firelight cast dancing shadows across antique furniture. You know what haunts me most, Robert said, now seated on the floor beside the hearth, his back against an armchair. I've suspected for years about Susan and Andrew, about the financial irregularities, but I looked away. I chose willful blindness. Why? Chloe asked, positioned carefully in the chair adjacent to him. Fear, I suppose. Fear of confronting ugly truths. He looked up at her. You have remarkable eyes, Chloe. They see too much. I should go, she whispered, suddenly aware of how close they'd drifted, how the air between them had transformed into something dangerous, electric. Yes, you should, he agreed, his voice equally soft. Neither moved. Later, Chloe would remember the moment as inevitable as gravity, his hand reaching up to brush her cheek, her leaning down, drawn by a force she couldn't name. Their lips met tentatively at first, then with escalating hunger as years of emptiness and longing on both sides ignited into flame. "This is madness," she whispered against his mouth as his hands tangled in her hair. "Yes," he agreed, pulling her down to the thick carpet before the fire. Beautiful madness. Outside, the storm reached its apex, a perfect mirror to the tempest breaking loose within the mansion's walls. In a room across the city, Susan Mitchell's phone rang unanswered as she lay entwined with Andrew Clark, their own betrayal reaching new depths as they finalized plans for Robert's gradual, untraceable poisoning, scheduled to begin upon her return, but for this stolen, impossible night, as wind and rain beat against ancient stone and glass, Chloe and Robert remained locked in their fleeting paradise, unaware that their actions would set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately expose 40 years of buried crimes and secrets. Morning light crept through the study blinds, painting stripes across Chloe's face. She woke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The events of the previous night crashed over her in waves. The storm, Robert's confession, their passionate encounter by the fireplace. Now, in the harsh clarity of dawn, the magnitude of her mistake settled like lead in her stomach. Robert was nowhere to be seen. A cashmere throw had been draped over her while she slept, and her clothes, hastily discarded hours before, had been neatly folded on a nearby chair. The considerate gesture somehow made everything worse. "What have I done?" she whispered, quickly dressing. 25 years of careful living, of maintaining dignity despite hardship, and she'd thrown it all away for one reckless night with a married man. Her employer, no less. Chloe checked her reflection in a decorative mirror, trying to erase any evidence of her transgression. She looked different somehow, as though the night had marked her in ways invisible to the eye but apparent to anyone who might look closely. Voices drifted from the hallway. She froze, recognizing Robert's deep timbre and Walter's more weathered tones. They were just outside the door. "Should be back by this evening." "Sir?" Walter was saying. Mrs. Mitchell called to confirm her flight. "Thank you, Walter. I'll be in meetings all day. Please have the car ready at 8. "Very good, sir. And shall I inform Miss Freeman she's needed today? The storm left quite a mess in the conservatory." A pause. "No, give her the day off. If Jenkins can handle it." Footsteps retreated down the hallway. Chloe waited until silence returned before slipping out through the study's secondary door, which led to a seldom-used corridor. She navigated the mansion by memory, avoiding the main areas where staff might be working, and escaped through a side entrance. Outside, the storm's aftermath was evident in downed branches and scattered debris. Chloe hurried down the street, shame and confusion battling for dominance in her mind. Had Robert's dismissal of her services for the day been consideration? Or was he already regretting their encounter? Perhaps both. For the next week, Chloe threw herself into her work with redoubled vigor. Arriving early and leaving late, she avoided being alone with Robert, who seemed equally determined to maintain professional distance. Their eyes occasionally met across rooms, but both quickly looked away, the weight of their shared secret hanging between them. On the 10th day after the storm, Chloe was cleaning the rarely used music room when she overheard voices from the adjacent sunroom. The sliding pocket doors between the rooms had been left slightly ajar, creating a narrow gap through which conversation carried. "It's completely tasteless," Susan was saying, her voice diamond sharp. "He insists on having the old college friends at the anniversary party, as if I want to reminisce about those days." "Darling, it's all part of the image," replied a male voice. Andrew Clark, Robert's business partner, and apparently Susan's lover, the childhood sweethearts who built an empire together. "The board eats it up." "Speaking of eating, how's our special project coming along?" Andrew chuckled. "Perfectly on schedule. I've arranged for the first phase to begin at the anniversary dinner, just a light dose to start. Nothing that would raise suspicions. Gradual deterioration over 6 to 8 months, attributed to stress and overwork. By the time anyone thinks to look deeper, it'll be far too late. And Dr. Moreland is on board. He's in significant debt after his divorce, Amazing what people will do when their backs are against the wall. He'll document everything as natural causes. Heart failure secondary to chronic stress. Chloe's blood ran cold. They were discussing murder, Robert's murder, in the casual tones of people planning a dinner party. Once it's done, how quickly can we move on the Asian expansion? Susan asked. Immediately. The paperwork is already prepared. Just needs Robert's signature. Or, in the unfortunate event of his incapacity, yours as his devoted wife and heir. Their laughter made Chloe's skin crawl, fighting rising panic. She carefully backed away from the door. She needed to warn Robert immediately. She found him in his study, reviewing contracts. He looked up in surprise when she entered without knocking, closing the door behind her. "Chloe, what? They're planning to poison you," she blurted out, then quickly recounted what she'd overheard. Robert's face hardened with each word. "You're certain about this?" "Completely," Chloe insisted. "They mentioned a dar, Moreland, something being administered at your anniversary dinner, making it look like natural causes." He paced the room, running a hand through his hair in a gesture she now recognized as signaling deep distress. "I knew they were embezzling. But murder." He looked at her sharply. "Did they see you?" "No, I'm sure they didn't." "Good." He reached for his phone. "I need to call my security team. My lawyer." A sharp knock interrupted him. Without waiting for response, Susan entered, Andrew Clark close behind her. Her smile froze when she saw Chloe. "Well, isn't this cozy?" Susan said, her voice glacial. "The maid takes such a personal interest in your welfare." "Darling," Robert straightened. "Susan, Andrew, we were just discussing household matters." "I'm sure you were." Susan's gaze slid to Chloe, calculating and cold. "Tell me, does household matters include my diamond tennis bracelet, the one that seems to have mysteriously vanished from my jewelry box?" Chloe blinked in confusion. "I don't understand." "No." Susan reached into her handbag, withdrawing a small velvet pouch. She upended it on Robert's desk, spilling out a glittering diamond bracelet. "Then perhaps you can explain why security found this hidden in your locker in the staff room." "That's impossible," Chloe gasped. "I never—" "Save it," Susan snapped. "We have you on camera entering our bedroom yesterday when you thought no one was home. Did you think we wouldn't notice? A $50,000 bracelet?" Robert looked between the bracelet and Chloe, uncertainty clouding his features. "Chloe, is this true?" "No, I was never in your bedroom yesterday. I was working in the library all afternoon. Mrs. Jenkins can confirm." "Mrs. Jenkins left early with a migraine," Andrew interjected smoothly. "Convenient timing, wouldn't you say?" Susan stepped closer to Robert. "I didn't want to believe it at first. I've always trusted your judgment about staff. But when security mentioned items going missing, we installed cameras." She placed a hand on his arm. "I'm sorry, darling. I know how you hate being deceived." The irony of her words would have been laughable if the situation weren't so dire. Chloe looked desperately at Robert, willing him to remember what she'd just told him about Susan and Andrew's plans. "Robert, please," she began. "They're lying. They're trying to discredit me because I overheard." "Enough," Susan cut her off. "Really, Robert, are you going to let this thief slander us now? The evidence is right there. Call the police." Andrew already had his phone out. "I'm contacting them now." Robert's face had gone completely blank, a mask revealing nothing of his thoughts. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat. "That won't be necessary, Andrew." For a moment, Chloe felt a surge of hope. "We don't need the publicity," Robert continued. "Miss Freeman will gather her belongings and leave immediately without references." The betrayal hit Chloe like a physical blow. After everything they'd shared, he believed Susan's transparent frame-up over her warning. "You can't be serious," she whispered. "Robert, they're planning to kill you. This is just to silence me." Susan laughed, a tinkling sound utterly devoid of warmth. "Oh my, murder accusations now, how melodramatic. Perhaps we should call the police after all." Robert wouldn't meet Chloe's eyes. "Just go, Chloe. Consider it a courtesy that I'm not pressing charges." Tears burned behind her eyes, but Chloe refused to let them fall. The medallion around her neck suddenly felt heavy, as though the weight of some unnamed destiny had settled on her shoulders. "You'll regret this," she said quietly. "Not because of me, but because you chose willful blindness yet again." As Chloe was escorted from the mansion by security, Susan's cold smile of triumph was the last thing she saw. On the street, with nothing but her purse and damaged pride, Chloe made a silent vow. Chicago had taken everything from her. Twice now, it seemed, she would never return. What she didn't know yet was that she carried with her something that would forever bind her to the man who had just betrayed her. A child, conceived on that storm-swept night, who would one day help uncover 40 years of buried secrets and lies. 20 years later, the small Fairfield diner bustled with the usual Friday morning crowd. Chloe wiped down the counter, her movements efficient after years of practice. At 45, she retained the quiet beauty that had once caught Robert Mitchell's eye, though life had etched fine lines around her eyes and threaded silver through her dark hair. "More coffee, Miss Freeman." Old Mr. Garvey held out his mug, his rheumy eyes twinkling with the same appreciation he'd shown since she started working there 19 years ago. "Coming right up." Chloe smiled, filling his cup. "How's that granddaughter of yours doing at college? Top of her class?" "Just like your Ethan." Pride warmed Chloe's chest at the mention of her son, Ethan Freeman, 20 years old, brilliant, and the spitting image of his father, a father who had no idea he existed. Her shift ended at noon, giving her just enough time to change before her second job as a receptionist at Fairfield Medical Associates. On Saturdays and Sundays, she cleaned houses for extra income. 3 jobs for nearly 2 decades. Whatever it took to give Ethan every opportunity she'd been denied. The pregnancy had blindsided her. 2 months after fleeing Chicago, nauseated and exhausted in her tiny rented room, Chloe had stared at the positive test in disbelief. Her first instinct had been to contact Robert, but pride held her back. He had chosen Susan and her lies. Let him live with the consequences. Fairfield became her refuge, small enough to disappear in, far enough from Chicago to feel safe. She'd given birth to Ethan alone, worked through her maternity leave, and raised him on bedtime stories and weekend science experiments instead of luxuries. "Mom?" Ethan's voice pulled her from her memories as he slid onto a counter stool. His eyes, so like Robert's it sometimes hurt to look at them, sparkled with barely contained excitement. "Shouldn't you be in class?" Chloe asked, automatically pouring him a glass of water. "Cancelled. Professor Collins has the flu." He pulled an envelope from his backpack, hands trembling slightly. "It came?" Chloe recognized the University of Chicago letterhead immediately. Her throat tightened. "Have you opened it?" "Wanted to wait for you." The diner seemed to fall silent as Ethan carefully opened the envelope. His eyes scanned the letter, then lifted to meet hers. "Full scholarship," he whispered. "Business administration. Full ride, Mom. I got in." Joy and terror collided in Chloe's chest. University of Chicago, just blocks from the Mitchell Empire headquarters, the city she'd sworn never to return to. "I'm so proud of you," she managed, reaching across the counter to squeeze his hand. She'd worry about Chicago later. This was Ethan's moment. That evening, as Ethan celebrated with friends from the community college, where he'd completed his associate's degree with perfect grades, Chloe opened the small wooden box she kept hidden at the back of her closet. Inside lay the gold medallion she hadn't worn since leaving Chicago, alongside a newspaper clipping showing Robert at some charity gala, his face older, but still handsome. She'd cut it from a discarded Chicago Tribune years ago, a momentary weakness she'd never confessed to anyone. "You did well without him," she told herself, closing the box firmly. "Ethan will do even better." Across the state, in the Mitchell mansion, Nathan Mitchell slumped in a chair beside his father's hospital bed. At 19, he was the mirror image of his half-brother. Same steel blue eyes, same strong jaw, same intelligent gaze. But where Ethan's eyes held warmth and optimism, Nathan's reflected the cold privilege of his upbringing. Robert Mitchell, once powerful and commanding, had withered to a shadow. For years, mysterious symptoms had plagued him. Tremors, fatigue, unexplained pain. Specialists scratched their heads while Dr. Moreland, the family physician, attributed it all to stress and overwork. Only recently had an independent toxicologist identified heavy metal poisoning, too late to reverse the damage completely. "The board meeting went well," Nathan said, more to fill the silence than because his father showed any interest. "Mother handled everything just like you would have. Susan Mitchell entered. Impeccable as always in designer mourning clothes, preparation for a widowhood that seemed imminent. "Nathan, darling, let your father rest. The doctors say excitement isn't good for his heart." Nathan noticed how his mother avoided touching his father, how she spoke about him as though he weren't present. The distance between his parents had always been vast, but lately, Susan seemed almost eager for Robert's decline. After she left, Nathan leaned closer to his father. "Dad, there's something I need to ask you." Robert's eyes, clouded with pain medication, focused with effort. "That night last week, when you were delirious, you kept mentioning someone named Chloe." Nathan hesitated. "Who is she?" Something flickered in Robert's gaze. Awareness, perhaps regret. "The timing doesn't make sense," Nathan continued. "You said you had a son you abandoned, but I was born 3 months after this Chloe person left. Did you have another family somewhere?" Robert's papery hand trembled as he reached for the notepad by his bed. His once strong handwriting now a shaky scrawl. Bottom drawer, office safe. Code 528491. "What's there?" Nathan asked. But Robert had drifted back to sleep, or perhaps unconsciousness. Nathan wasn't sure anymore. Later that night, after ensuring his mother was occupied with her weekly bridge game, Nathan slipped into his father's home office. The hidden safe behind the Monet reproduction yielded easily to the code. Inside, he found a leather journal and a file labeled simply CEF, with surveillance photos spanning 20 years. A young woman with a growing boy who looked startlingly like Nathan himself. The journal's most recent entry, dated just before Robert's hospitalization, read, "I've changed the will. Carter has the original. 50% to Nathan, 50% to Chloe's son. My son. May he forgive what I was too cowardly to acknowledge in life." At the back was a sealed envelope addressed to someone named Ethan Freeman. Nathan closed the safe, his world tilting on its axis. Somewhere out there, he had a brother, a twin by all appearances, and his mother almost certainly had no idea. Or if she did, a chilling thought struck him. If his mother had been slowly poisoning his father. As he'd begun to suspect, what would she do to protect her claim to the Mitchell fortune from a previously unknown heir? The answer came 3 months later, when Robert Mitchell died quietly in his sleep, officially from heart failure. At the funeral, Susan wept perfect tears while Andrew Clark stood supportively at her side. Only Nathan noticed their fingers briefly intertwining behind the modest spray of lilies. That evening, as condolence cards piled up in the foyer, Nathan made a decision. The private investigator his father had used was still on retainer. It was time to find Chloe Freeman and the brother he never knew he had, before Susan discovered the changed will and the threat to her ambitions. What Nathan couldn't know was that at that exact moment, Ethan Freeman was packing his belongings in Fairfield, preparing for his journey to the University of Chicago. Unwittingly headed straight into the heart of a decades-old web of lies, murder, and stolen legacies. The Illinois countryside blurred past as Ethan Freeman gazed out the bus window. His worn backpack contained everything he deemed essential for university life. Clothes, laptop, and the dog-eared copy of The Innovator's Dilemma his mother had saved up to buy him for his 18th birthday. The rest would follow once he settled into student housing. "Next stop, Chicago," the driver announced. Ethan's stomach tightened with anticipation, despite growing up in Fairfield. Chicago had always loomed large in his imagination, a place of opportunity, and, mysteriously, a city his mother refused to discuss. Whenever he'd asked why they never visited, Chloe changed the subject or offered vague explanations about preferring small-town life. He checked his phone, finding a new text from her. "Call when you arrive. Love you." Simple words that carried the weight of her worry. This was the farthest they'd ever been apart. Meanwhile, in Fairfield, Chloe paced her small living room. The house felt eerily quiet without Ethan. For 20 years, her life had revolved around him, his needs, his education, his future. Now, she faced a strange new reality. Solitude. A knock at the door startled her. Visitors were rare, especially on a Sunday morning, when she opened the door. The young man standing on her porch nearly stopped her heart. For one disorienting moment, she thought Ethan had returned, but subtle differences quickly registered. Slightly more expensive clothes, a different haircut, a certain confidence in his posture that came from privilege rather than hard work. "Chloe Freeman?" he asked, his voice so familiar yet belonging to a stranger. "Yes," she managed, gripping the doorframe for support. "Who are you?" "Nathan Mitchell." He watched her face carefully, noting how she paled at his surname. "May I come in? It's about my father and your son." The world seemed to tilt beneath Chloe's feet. 20 years of carefully constructed security crumbled in an instant. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said automatically, but her voice lacked conviction. Nathan's blue eyes, Robert's eyes, Ethan's eyes, held hers steadily. "I think you do. My father died 3 months ago. Before he did, he left something for your son, for my brother." Brother. The word hung in the air between them, undeniable and life-altering. Reluctantly, Chloe stepped aside, allowing Nathan into her modest home. On the mantel, Ethan's high school graduation photo seemed to watch them accusingly. "He looks exactly like me," Nathan said quietly, staring at the photograph. "Why are you here?" Chloe asked, ignoring the observation. After 20 years of silence, why now? Nathan sat on the edge of her sofa, looking suddenly very young despite his expensive watch and tailored clothes. "Because my father is dead, and I believe my mother killed him." The blunt statement hit Chloe like a physical blow. Robert, dead. She had imagined this moment differently, perhaps a chance meeting years from now, when the old wounds had fully scarred over. Never this. Learning of his death from the son he'd acknowledged while their shared blood remained hidden. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said stiffly. "Are you?" Nathan challenged. "After what he did to you? You don't know what happened between us." "I know enough." Nathan withdrew the leather journal from his messenger bag. "He kept track of you both. Hired an investigator he knew about Ethan." Fury flashed through Chloe. "He knew all these years. He knew he had a son struggling to afford school supplies and decent clothes. And he did nothing." "Not nothing," Nathan corrected. "He set up a trust account in Ethan's name. And just before he died, he changed his will. Half his personal fortune goes to Ethan." Chloe sank into a chair, stunned. "That's impossible." "It's true. That's why I'm here. The lawyer can't execute the will until Ethan is notified. But my mother doesn't know about the changes yet when she finds out." He trailed off. "Implications clear. Susan would never allow it," Chloe whispered, memories of the woman's cold calculation flooding back. "Exactly. Where is Ethan now?" "He left this morning, University of Chicago, full scholarship." Pride momentarily overtook Chloe's shock. Nathan nodded appreciatively. "Smart. Like me? Must be in the genes." His attempt at levity fell flat. "But Chicago isn't safe. Not if my mother discovers who he is. She and Andrew Clark have been systematically poisoning my father for years. I found evidence in his medical records. If they'll kill to protect their control of Mitchell Enterprises." Chloe's phone rang. Interrupting Nathan's warning, Ethan's name flashed on the screen. "It's him," she said. "He must have arrived in Chicago." "Don't tell him about me," Nathan urged. "Not yet. Not over the phone. We need to explain in person." Chloe hesitated, then answered. "Ethan, are you there safely?" "Yeah, Mom. Just got off the bus. Orientation starts tomorrow, but I'm heading to campus to get my bearings. It's incredible here. You should see the buildings." His excitement made Chloe's heart ache. "That's wonderful, honey. Listen, something's come up. I might visit sooner than we planned." "Really? That's great. Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," she lied. Nathan's presence a looming contradiction. "Just miss you already. Text me when you're settled in the dorm, okay?" After they disconnected, Chloe turned to Nathan. "I need to see him in person today." "I'll drive you," Nathan offered immediately. "My car's outside." The sleek black Audi in her driveway represented everything that separated Ethan's life from his half-brothers. As they prepared to leave, Chloe hesitated at the threshold. "I need to get something first." She retrieved the wooden box from her closet, removing the medallion and placing it around her neck for the first time in 20 years. Its weight felt both familiar and foreign against her skin. Nathan's eyes widened at the sight of it. "That emblem, where did you get that?" "It was my aunt's," Chloe replied automatically. The same answer she'd given Robert decades ago. "Why?" "It's just, I've seen it before in my father's study. An old painting with the same symbol. He shook his head. Probably nothing. The drive to Chicago passed in tense silence, Chloe watching the familiar landscape appear with growing dread. She'd sworn never to return, yet here she was, drawn back by the same bloodline that had caused her to flee as they approached the outskirts of the city. Nathan's phone rang. He checked the caller ID and frowned. "It's the university hospital," he said, connecting the call. "Hello? Yes, this is Nathan Mitchell." Chloe watched his face drain of color. "When? How bad?" "Yes, I understand. I'll be right there." He ended the call, hands tightening on the steering wheel. "There's been an accident. A student was hit by a car near campus. He had no ID, but his phone kept ringing. Someone named Mom calling repeatedly. Terror gripped Chloe. She fumbled for her phone, calling Ethan again. The call went straight to voicemail. "It might not be him," Nathan said, but his voice lacked conviction. "But we need to get to the hospital now." As they sped toward the University Medical Center, neither voiced what both were thinking, that the timing was too perfect to be coincidence. If Susan Mitchell had discovered Robert's changed will, she wouldn't hesitate to eliminate the threat, even if that threat was an innocent 20-year-old who didn't yet know his own origins. The emergency room was chaos. Doctors rushing, families waiting anxiously, the sharp antiseptic smell mingling with fear and pain. Chloe approached the reception desk, heart hammering. "My son," she managed. "Ethan Freeman. I was told he might be here." The nurse checked her computer. "Yes, he was brought in about an hour ago. The doctor will be out shortly to speak with you." Chloe swayed on her feet, Nathan's hand steadying her elbow. How is he?" Before the nurse could answer, double doors swung open, and a doctor in surgical scrubs approached. "Mrs. Freeman, I'm Dr. Reeves. Your son is stable but unconscious. He suffered a concussion and several broken ribs when the vehicle struck him." "Can I see him?" Chloe asked. "Briefly. He's being prepped for a CT scan to check for internal bleeding." As the doctor led them toward the trauma unit, Nathan hung back slightly, uncertain of his place in this unfolding drama. Then, catching a glimpse through the window of the patient room, he froze. There, lying pale and still on the hospital bed, was his mirror image, the brother he'd never known, whose very existence now placed him in the crosshairs of a deadly conspiracy. "Oh my God," he whispered. "It's really him." The hospital room clock ticked relentlessly as Chloe sat beside Ethan's bed, her fingers lightly wrapped around his bruised hand. 16 hours had passed since the accident, and though his condition had stabilized, he remained unconscious. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, mentioning normal healing processes and expected recovery timelines, but their clinical assurances did little to ease her fear. Nathan paced by the window, his reflection ghosting across the glass with each turn. In just one day, his entire understanding of family had been upended. The brother he never knew lay broken in a hospital bed, and the mother he'd always known might be responsible. "The driver never stopped," he said, breaking the silence. "No witnesses, no traffic cameras in that particular spot. Convenient, wouldn't you say?" Chloe didn't respond, her focus entirely on Ethan's breathing. "Mom," Nathan tried again, the word awkward on his tongue. "We need to talk about what happens next." This got her attention. "I'm not your mother, Nathan." The coldness in her voice made him flinch. "Biologically, no, but you're more a mother to me than Susan ever was." He moved closer to the bed. "Look at him. Look at me. We're identical. Same eyes, same jawline, same everything. Don't you think that means something?" "It means Robert Mitchell was unfaithful to his wife," Chloe said flatly. "It doesn't make us family." Nathan ran a hand through his hair, the same gesture Ethan made when frustrated. "My father kept tabs on you both for 20 years. He changed his will to include Ethan. Whatever happened between you two. He cared. If he cared, he would have acknowledged his son," Chloe snapped, then immediately lowered her voice. "He chose Susan's lies over the truth. He let her frame me for theft when I tried to warn him she was planning to kill him. And now look, she succeeded. And Ethan's paying the price." Nathan's phone vibrated with an incoming text. He checked it, frowning. "It's from Samantha. It's my mother's assistant," she says. "My mother's looking for me, asking questions about where I've been." He typed a quick response. "We don't have much time." "For what?" to figure out what we're up against. Nathan pulled a leather portfolio from his messenger bag. I brought copies of everything I found in my father's safe. The will's executor, James Carter, is out of the country until next week. Only he can officially inform Ethan about his inheritance. Until then, we need evidence to prove what my mother and Andrew did to my father. Chloe hesitated, torn between staying with Ethan and pursuing justice. A soft moan from the bed made the decision for her. Ethan's eyelids fluttered, then opened, revealing disoriented blue eyes. "Mom?" he mumbled, voice raspy from the breathing tube they'd removed hours earlier. "I'm here, honey," Chloe said, tears of relief stinging her eyes. "You're in the hospital. There was an accident." Ethan blinked slowly, struggling to focus. Then his gaze shifted to Nathan. Standing just behind Chloe, confusion spread across his face. "What the hell?" he whispered, looking from Nathan to his mother and back again. "Am I seeing things?" "No, you're not," Nathan said, stepping forward. "I'm Nathan Mitchell, and apparently, I'm your brother." The revelation hung in the air, too momentous for Ethan's pain-fogged mind to process immediately. "Brother," he repeated. "Mom, it's complicated," Chloe said, squeezing his hand. "Rest now. We'll explain everything when you're stronger." But Nathan shook his head. "We don't have that kind of time. The car that hit you wasn't an accident. Ethan, my mother, our father's widow, she's discovered you're entitled to half the Mitchell fortune. She tried to kill you to protect her claim." "Nathan," Chloe exclaimed. "He just woke up, and he needs to understand the danger he's in." Nathan turned back to Ethan. "Our father was Robert Mitchell, founder of Mitchell Enterprises. He died 3 months ago, poisoned slowly over years by his wife, Susan, and his business partner, Andrew Clark. Before he died, he changed his will to include you. If they succeeded in killing him, they certainly won't hesitate to eliminate you too." Ethan stared at them both, struggling to make sense of this bombshell. "This is insane," he finally managed. "I don't have a brother. My father was..." He stopped, suddenly realizing he'd never known who his father was. Chloe had always deflected his questions with vague explanations about a brief relationship that ended before she knew she was pregnant. "Mom," his voice held a new note. "Betrayal. Is this true?" Chloe closed her eyes briefly, 20 years of careful omissions collapsing around her. "Your father was Robert Mitchell," she admitted quietly. "I worked in his house as a maid. It was one night when I tried to warn him that Susan was planning to poison him. She framed me for theft. He chose to believe her. I left Chicago and never looked back." "And you never told me." Ethan's voice was hollow. "I was protecting you." "From what? From knowing that my father was alive? That I had a brother? That I was entitled to..." A coughing fit interrupted him, pain flashing across his face as broken ribs protested. "Take it easy," Nathan urged, pouring a cup of water. "Whatever issues we have to sort out, they can wait. Right now, we need to focus on keeping you safe until Carter returns and the will is officially executed." "Why should I trust either of you?" Ethan asked after sipping the water. "Everything I thought I knew was a lie." "Not everything," Chloe insisted. "Never my love for you." The door swung open before Ethan could respond. A young woman with auburn hair and intelligent green eyes stepped in, freezing when she saw the room's occupants. "Nathan," she said, recovering quickly. "Your mother's been calling nonstop. She knows you're at the hospital." "Samantha," Nathan nodded, turning to Chloe and Ethan. "This is Samantha Reed, my mother's personal assistant. And apparently," he added with a tight smile, "our only ally inside the Mitchell organization. I intercepted a call between your mother and Andrew," Samantha said urgently. "They know about Ethan. They're on their way here now." Panic flashed across Chloe's face. "We need to move him now." "Impossible," Nathan replied. "He's in no condition to leave. Besides, this confrontation was inevitable." "What do they know exactly?" Ethan asked, wincing as he tried to sit up straighter. Samantha glanced at the corridor outside. "They know you're Robert's son, that you're in his will, and that Nathan found you. They were explicit about eliminating the problem permanently." "We need evidence," Nathan muttered, pacing again. "Something concrete linking them to my father's poisoning." "I might have something," Samantha offered hesitantly. "Andrew keeps a private safe in his office." Last week, I saw him storing a vial there after meeting with Dr. Moreland. Can you access it? Nathan asked. Possibly. He sometimes asks me to retrieve documents when he's too busy. It's too dangerous, Chloe protested. It's our only shot at proving what they did, Nathan countered. If we can get evidence of the poison, tie it to my father's symptoms, we can go to the police before they make another attempt on Ethan's life. A tense silence filled the room as Ethan studied the faces around him. His mother, drawn with worry, his newfound brother, determined and focused, and Samantha, clearly terrified but resolute. Do it, Ethan finally said. But not you, Samantha. They'll suspect you immediately if anything goes missing. Nathan should go. They'd expect him to be at the office, dealing with his grief by throwing himself into work. Nathan nodded slowly. That could work. I know the building better than anyone. But what about you? You're still vulnerable here. I'll stay with him, Chloe said firmly. Not alone, Samantha interjected. I'll call hospital security. Tell them we've received threats against the patient. They'll post someone at the door. It's settled then, Nathan said, gathering his things. I'll head to the office, find that vial, and be back before dark. Samantha, text me if you hear anything else. As Nathan turned to leave, Ethan called out, Wait. With effort, he pulled himself up slightly. Be careful, brother. The word hung between them. Tentative but undeniable. Nathan nodded, a strange mix of emotions crossing his face. You too, my brother. After Nathan left, Chloe carefully adjusted Ethan's pillows, her movements tender despite the tension between them. When you're stronger, I'll tell you everything, she promised quietly. Every detail. No more secrets. Ethan looked at her, 20 years of questions in his eyes. You should have told me who my father was. I know, she admitted, the medallion around her neck catching the light as she leaned forward. But there's more to this story than you can imagine. More than even I understood until recently, outside the hospital. Nathan Mitchell slid into his Audi, unaware that a black sedan with tinted windows was already following his every move, and that his mother's web of deception stretched far deeper than anyone suspected, all the way back to a fire that had claimed the lives of the Grant family 40 years before. The Mitchell Enterprises headquarters dominated Chicago's skyline, 68 stories of gleaming glass and steel. A monument to Robert Mitchell's business acumen, Nathan had practically grown up in this building, trailing after his father through polished corridors while Susan attended charity luncheons and society functions. Now, as he strode through the executive floor, he saw the familiar space with new eyes. How many of these smiling employees had suspected his father was being slowly murdered? How many had kept silent out of fear or self-interest? Mr. Mitchell. His father's secretary rose from her desk, surprise evident in her expression. We weren't expecting you today. My deepest condolences. Again, thank you, Diane. Nathan forced a smile. Just needed to retrieve some personal items from my father's office. Of course, she hesitated. Your mother is in a meeting with the board. Should I let her know you're here? No need to disturb her. Nathan maintained his casual tone while inwardly calculating how much time he had. Board meetings typically ran 2 hours. I'll be quick. Robert Mitchell's corner office remained untouched since his death. A pristine shrine to corporate success, diplomas and awards lined the walls, interspersed with photographs of Robert shaking hands with presidents and prime ministers. None showed him smiling with his family. Nathan closed the door and moved swiftly to his father's desk. The first drawer yielded nothing but standard office supplies. The second contained financial reports Nathan had already reviewed. In the third, he found a small brass key he didn't recognize. A noise in the outer office froze him mid-search. Voices approached, one unmistakably his mother's sharp, commanding tone. The board meeting must have ended early. Completely unacceptable, Susan was saying. I want those transfer documents ready by morning, Andrew. Robert's sentiment has no place in business decisions. Nathan frantically scanned the room for an exit or hiding place. The private bathroom seemed his only option, but before he could move, the office door swung open. Susan Mitchell stopped abruptly, Andrew Clark nearly colliding with her from behind. Her surprise quickly morphed into suspicion. Nathan, what are you doing here? Her voice carried the Arctic chill he'd grown accustomed to over the years. Just collecting some of Dad's things. He pocketed the small key, hoping she hadn't noticed. Mementos. Susan's eyes narrowed. How touching, especially given your recent preoccupations. Tell me, how is your new friend, the one in the hospital? Nathan kept his expression neutral despite the threat lacing her words. I'm sure I don't know what you mean. Don't play games, Nathan, Andrew interjected, closing the office door. We know about the boy, and about Robert's little amendment to his will. You've been busy, Nathan acknowledged, abandoning pretense. First poisoning my father, now attempting to murder my brother. Mother of the Year material? Truly, Susan didn't flinch at the accusation. Instead, she smiled. The same smile Nathan had seen countless times at charity galas and press conferences, revealing nothing while concealing everything. Your father died of heart failure as documented by Dr. Moreland, she said smoothly. As for this person claiming to be Robert's son, well, gold diggers come with the territory in our position. I've simply been protecting our family interests. By running him down with a car, Nathan's hands curled into fists. Accidents happen in big cities. Andrew shrugged. Chicago traffic is notoriously dangerous. You won't get away with this, Nathan said. I have evidence, Susan laughed, the sound like breaking glass. No, you don't. But since we're being honest, let me be clear. Walk away, Nathan. That boy is not your concern. Your place is here, with your family, your legacy. My legacy, Nathan echoed. Built on murder and theft. Built on vision and sacrifice, Susan countered. Your grandfather understood that sentiment is weakness in business. Your father forgot that lesson. Don't make his mistake. What exactly did my grandfather sacrifice? Nathan challenged, a strange suspicion forming. Or rather, who? Something flickered in Susan's eyes. Surprise. Perhaps concern that he knew more than she'd assumed. Before she could respond, her phone rang. She checked the screen, then answered with obvious irritation. This better be important, Samantha. Her expression darkened as she listened. What do you mean? Disappeared? Find him. She disconnected, her mask of control slipping. We need to go now. Problems? Nathan asked innocently. Nothing that concerns you, Andrew replied, placing a proprietary hand on Susan's elbow. Though I suggest you consider your mother's advice. Family fortunes have been destroyed by less than illegitimate claims. After they departed, Nathan expelled a shaky breath. The confrontation had yielded no concrete evidence, but had confirmed his worst suspicions. Susan and Andrew were behind both his father's death and Ethan's accident. He turned his attention back to the mysterious key. It wasn't for any of the office fixtures. Too small, too old. Perhaps the building's antiquated record room in the basement worth checking. But first, he needed to warn Samantha that Susan was looking for her. His text went unanswered, concern mounting. Nathan headed for the elevator, the small brass key burning a hole in his pocket. Back at the hospital, Ethan drifted in and out of consciousness, pain medication blurring the edges of reality. Each time he woke, his mother was there, her worried face a constant amid the shifting fog. During one clearer moment, he found not his mother, but Walter, the elderly butler, seated beside his bed. The old man's rheumy eyes studied him with uncomfortable intensity. You look just like him, Walter murmured. As a young man, of course, before the weight of it all changed him. Who are you? Ethan asked, voice raspy from disuse. Walter Simmons? I served the Mitchell family for over 40 years. The old man leaned forward. But I served another family first, the Grants. The name meant nothing to Ethan. But something shifted in the room's atmosphere, as though long-dormant secrets were stirring to life. Where's my mother? Ethan asked, trying to sit up. Speaking with the doctors. Walter's gnarled hand moved to his pocket, withdrawing a tarnished photograph. I recognized her medallion yesterday. I've only seen one like it before. It belonged to Edward Grant. He held out the faded image, a handsome couple in front of a mansion. The woman holding a small girl about 5 years old. All three wore medallions identical to his mother's. The Grants owned the land where Mitchell Enterprises now stands, Walter continued. Their home, their fortune, everything was taken from them in the fire. Everyone believed young Olivia died with her parents that night. His voice dropped to a whisper. But I always had my doubts. What are you saying? Ethan asked, though a terrible suspicion was forming. I'm saying your mother isn't Chloe Freeman. Her real name is Olivia Grant, the sole heir to the Grant fortune, a fortune stolen by Albert Mitchell and his son Robert through murder and arson. The room seemed to tilt around Ethan. That's impossible. My mother would know who she is. Not if she was only 5 when it happened. Not if the trauma was so great her mind protected her by forgetting. Walter tucked the photograph back into his pocket. The medallion is proof. It bears the Grant family crest, a symbol I've not seen in 40 years, until your mother walked into that hospital room wearing it around her neck. Before Ethan could respond, the door opened, revealing Chloe and Samantha. His mother's face drained of color at the sight of Walter. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, rushing to Ethan's side. "Returning a piece of your past, Miss Grant," Walter replied, standing with effort. "Or should I say Miss Freeman? You've carried many names, but only one birthright." "I don't know what you're talking about," Chloe insisted, but her hand went instinctively to the medallion at her throat. Walter smiled sadly. "You will. Memory is a curious thing. It hides what we cannot bear, but never truly forgets." He turned to Samantha. "Mrs. Mitchell is looking for you, young lady. She knows you've switched allegiances." "How did you—" Samantha began, but was interrupted by her phone's urgent buzzing. "It's Nathan," she said, checking the screen. "He says to meet him at the old Mitchell mansion. The Grant annexes. He's found something in the company archives." Chloe swayed slightly, the blood draining from her face at the mention of the Grant name. Flashes of memory assaulted her, firelight reflecting on polished banisters. A child's terrified screams, rough hands carrying her through smoke-filled corridors. "Mom," Ethan's voice cut through the disorienting visions. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," she lied, shaking off the disturbing images. "I'm fine." But her voice lacked conviction, and the medallion suddenly felt unnaturally heavy around her neck, as though awakening after a long dormancy. Walter watched her reaction with knowing eyes. "The past never stays buried, Miss Grant. Not when there's unfinished business." He moved toward the door, pausing at the threshold. "I'll help however I can. I've carried this guilt for 40 years, stood by while crimes went unpunished. Perhaps now, finally, justice can be served." After he departed, Samantha looked between mother and son, confusion evident. What was that about? Who were the Grants? "I don't know," Chloe whispered, but somewhere deep in her mind, in a locked compartment she hadn't accessed in decades, a small girl screamed as flames consumed everything she'd ever known. The old Mitchell mansion stood in sharp contrast to the modern high-rise that served as the company's current headquarters. Dating back to the 1920s, the stone edifice had once been the crown jewel of Chicago's Gold Coast, before Robert Mitchell Sr. had expanded his empire into downtown proper. Now it served primarily as a storage facility for corporate archives and a seldom-used venue for the occasional board retreat. What few people remembered was that the mansion had not originally belonged to the Mitchells at all. Nathan stood in the cavernous entrance hall, dust motes dancing in the shafts of late-afternoon sunlight that penetrated the stained glass windows. The brass key from his father's desk had indeed opened the records room in the corporate headquarters basement, revealing a set of architectural plans and property deeds that had sent him racing to this forgotten landmark. Footsteps echoed from the marble floor as Samantha entered, her expression tense. "Did anyone follow you?" Nathan asked, scanning the space behind her. "I don't think so. I took 3 different ride shares and walked the last few blocks." She glanced around nervously. "What is this place? The original Mitchell family home? Or so I always believed." Nathan withdrew a yellow document from his messenger bag, but according to these records, it was actually called Grant Manor until 1985, when my grandfather had it legally renamed. Samantha's brow furrowed. "Grant, that's the name Walter mentioned at the hospital." "Exactly. The Grants were one of Chicago's founding families. They owned most of the land where Mitchell Tower now stands." Nathan's voice dropped. "Until they died in a suspicious fire 40 years ago." A new voice joined the conversation. "Not all of them died." They turned to find Walter standing in the doorway, supporting himself with a cane. Behind him, Chloe helped a pale but determined Ethan, who leaned heavily on a hospital-issued walker. "You should be in the hospital," Nathan admonished his brother. "And miss family history night." "Not a chance." Ethan's attempt at humor was undermined by his obvious pain. Chloe's eyes darted around the mansion's entrance hall, her face a mask of unease. I shouldn't be here, she whispered. This place, you've been here before, Walter said gently. Though you were very young. Nathan approached Chloe cautiously. Walter believes you're Olivia Grant, the daughter who supposedly died in the fire. That medallion you wear. It's the Grant family crest. Chloe's hand went protectively to the gold piece hanging around her neck. My aunt gave me this. She said it was a family heirloom. Your aunt, Walter said, was Helen Winters, the Grants' housekeeper. She wasn't related to you by blood, Miss Chloe. She rescued you from the fire and fled Chicago to protect you. The color drained from Chloe's face. That's impossible. I would remember something like that. Not necessarily, Samantha interjected quietly. My mother was a trauma therapist. She said children sometimes block out traumatic memories completely. It's a survival mechanism. An uncomfortable silence fell over the group as the implications sank in. Finally, Ethan spoke. If what you're saying is true, then my mother is the rightful owner of all this. He gestured broadly at their surroundings. The Mitchell fortune was built on stolen Grant property. Built on murder, Nathan corrected grimly. If my grandfather and father deliberately set that fire to acquire the Grant holdings. Chloe shook her head, overwhelmed. This is insane. I can't be Olivia Grant. I would know who I am. Perhaps seeing more of the house might jog your memory, Walter suggested. There's a portrait gallery on the second floor. The likeness between you and Clara Grant, your mother, is striking. As they made their slow procession up the grand staircase, accommodating Ethan's limited mobility, Nathan watched Chloe carefully. Her eyes tracked across the ornate banisters and crown moldings with growing unease. As though seeing ghostly overlays of a past she couldn't quite grasp, the portrait gallery occupied most of the mansion's east wing, a long hall lined with paintings of stern-faced patriarchs and their elegant wives. Halfway down, Walter stopped before a large canvas featuring a couple in their 30s with a small dark-haired girl between them. Edward and Clara Grant, he said quietly, with their daughter Olivia, painted just months before the fire. Chloe stared at the portrait, transfixed. The woman in the painting could have been her twin. Same high cheekbones, same slight arch to the eyebrows, same dimple in the left cheek when she smiled. And the child wore a medallion identical to the one around Chloe's neck. This doesn't prove anything, she whispered, but doubt had crept into her voice. There's more, Nathan said. The records I found show that my grandfather acquired the Grant properties through a shell company after the fire. The transaction was completed within days of their deaths, suspiciously fast for legitimate business. Samantha, who had been examining other portraits, called out suddenly, Nathan, look at this one. They gathered around a smaller painting tucked in a shadowy alcove. It depicted a young man in early 20th century attire, standing proudly beside a newly built automobile. Around his neck hung a medallion identical to Chloe's. Thomas Grant, Walter explained. Edward's grandfather. He established the Grant shipping empire during Prohibition. All legitimate business, unlike some of his contemporaries. That's the family motto on the medallion. Veritas incinere resurget. Truth will rise from the ashes, Ethan translated, surprising everyone. At their looks, he shrugged. 4 years of Latin in high school. A strangled sound escaped Chloe's throat. All eyes turned to her as she stumbled backward, hands pressed to her temples. Mom, Ethan moved to her side. Concerned. The fire, she whispered, eyes wide but seeing something far away. I remember the fire. The memories crashed over her like a tsunami. The acrid smell of smoke, the terrifying heat, her mother pushing her into Helen's arms, her father's desperate shout cut short by falling timber, and through it all, a man's face visible through the smoke, watching dispassionately as her world burned. Albert Mitchell, she gasped. He was there. He watched us burn. Walter nodded grimly. I suspected as much. I was away that night, visiting my sister. By the time I returned, the mansion was in ashes and you were presumed dead with your parents. Albert claimed to have tried to save them, but was driven back by the flames. He was hailed as a hero for his efforts. Some hero, Nathan muttered, disgust evident in his voice. My family's entire fortune is built on murder. A phone chimed, breaking the tense silence. Samantha checked her device, face paling. It's Susan. She's demanding to know where I am. She's threatening to call the police if I don't return to the office immediately. She's trying to locate us, Nathan realized. We need to move if she discovers we're here, at the scene of her family's original crime. Too late, a cold voice announced from the gallery entrance. Susan Mitchell stood framed in the doorway, Andrew Clark at her shoulder. Behind them loomed two men with the unmistakable bulk of concealed weapons beneath their jackets. How convenient, all the loose ends, gathered in one place. Susan's gaze locked on Chloe, recognition and hatred flashing in her eyes. So the maid returns, and wearing the Grant medallion no less. How poetic. You knew, Chloe said, voice strengthening with each word as memories continued to surface. You recognized me 20 years ago. Not at first, Susan admitted with chilling casualness. But that medallion gave you away. I'd seen it in the old Grant photographs. Robert was too besotted to notice, but I knew exactly who you were. Her lips curved in a cruel smile. Why do you think I was so eager to get rid of you? History has a nasty habit of repeating itself when Mitchell men fall for Grant women. Andrew stepped forward. Enough reminiscing. We have a situation to resolve. He gestured to the armed men. Take care of them. Make it look like an accident. Gas leak, old wiring. This place is a fire trap anyway. How appropriate, Susan added. Fire claimed the Grants once. It will again. Nathan moved protectively in front of Ethan, his mind racing for an escape plan, but it was Walter who acted first, his elderly frame suddenly straightening as he reached into his jacket. Not this time, the old butler said, withdrawing a small revolver. I stood by once and let this family commit murder. I won't do it again. For a moment, the tableau in the portrait gallery froze. Walter, with his small revolver, trained unsteadily on Susan and Andrew, their hired muscle reaching for concealed weapons. The tension hung thick in the air, fragile as spun glass. Put that away, old man, Andrew said, his voice dangerously soft. You're outmatched and outgunned. Walter's hand trembled but remained firm. Perhaps, but at my age, I have little to lose. His roomy eyes narrowed. And I've lived with my silence long enough. Samantha had slowly inched toward the antique fire alarm on the wall. With a sudden movement, she pulled it down, unleashing an ear-splitting screech throughout the mansion in the confusion. Nathan grabbed a heavy brass candlestick from a nearby table and swung it at the nearest thug, connecting with a sickening crack. The service stairs, Walter shouted over the alarm. This way. As they scrambled toward the hidden servants' passage, a gunshot rang out. Andrew had drawn his own weapon, the bullet splintering the wooden paneling inches from Chloe's head. Ethan stumbled in his weakened state, and Nathan pulled his brother's arm over his shoulders, half carrying him toward safety. They tumbled into the narrow staircase, Walter slamming the disguised door behind them. It leads to the old kitchen, he wheezed. There's an exit to the gardens from there. The ancient wooden steps creaked ominously beneath their feet as they descended into darkness, guided only by the weak glow of Samantha's phone flashlight. Behind them, muffled shouts and pounding feet signaled their pursuers had discovered their escape route. As they reached the ground floor, a crash from above indicated the door had been broken down. The pursuit was closing in. The kitchen was a vast, abandoned space of cast-iron stoves and marble-topped preparation tables. Moonlight filtered through grimy windows, casting long shadows across dusty floors. There, Walter pointed to a heavy oak door. That leads to the east garden. Once outside, run for the street. There's a police station 3 blocks north. But as they reached the door, they found it chained and padlocked from the outside. Damn it, Nathan muttered. We need another way out. The cellar, Walter suggested. It connects to an old prohibition tunnel that runs beneath the street. The exit is in the carriage house. A bullet ricocheted off a copper pot hanging from the ceiling, sending them ducking for cover. Go, Walter urged, positioning himself behind a massive butcher block island, revolver at the ready. I'll hold them off. We're not leaving you, Ethan insisted, but Walter shook his head. I've waited 40 years for redemption. Now go. Nathan found the cellar door, helping Ethan down the steep stairs as Chloe and Samantha followed. Behind them, gunfire erupted as Walter exchanged shots with their pursuers. The cellar was a labyrinth of stone and ancient timber, the air thick with dust and the musty scent of decades-old wine bottles. Chloe moved with surprising certainty, leading them through the darkness as if guided by some internal map. "How do you know where to go?" Samantha asked, breathless from their flight. "I don't know," Chloe admitted. "My feet just... remember?" They had nearly reached the tunnel entrance when the sharp odor of gasoline permeated the air. A moment later, an orange glow appeared at the top of the cellar stairs. Fire. Susan and Andrew had set the old mansion ablaze, intending to recreate the crime that had begun their ascent to power 40 years earlier. "They're going to burn us alive," Samantha whispered in horror. "Not if I can help it," Nathan said grimly, pushing at the ancient wooden door that led to the tunnel. It refused to budge, swollen with decades of moisture. As smoke began filtering down into the cellar, Ethan joined his brother, throwing his weight against the stubborn door. Despite his injuries, the wood groaned but held firm. "Together," Ethan insisted, and the brothers synchronized their efforts, shoulders pressed side by side against the weathered planks. With a splintering crack, the door finally gave way. The tunnel beyond was narrow and pitch black, but a faint breeze suggested it remained open at the far end. They moved as quickly as Ethan's condition allowed, the rumbling of the fire growing louder behind them. "What about Walter?" Chloe asked, voice tight with worry. "He knew what he was doing," Nathan replied, though the words tasted bitter in his mouth. Another life sacrificed to the Mitchell-Grant feud. They had traveled perhaps 50 yards when a figure loomed suddenly from the darkness ahead. Andrew Clark, face twisted with malice, gun raised. "End of the line," he snarled. "Susan's handling our fire brigade friends. Tragic accident. Old wiring in a historical building. Such a shame about the casualties." Ethan wavered on his feet, still weak from his injuries. "You won't get away with this," Andrew laughed. "We already have. For 40 years, what's a few more bodies?" His gaze locked on Chloe. "History does have a certain symmetry, doesn't it, Olivia Grant? Dying in flames just like her parents." Memory flashed in Chloe's mind. That same dismissive tone, that same contemptuous smile, glimpsed through the smoke 4 decades earlier. "You were there," she said suddenly. "The night of the fire. You helped Albert Mitchell kill my parents." Something flickered in Andrew's eyes. Surprise that she remembered. Perhaps a touch of fear. "I was just getting started in business then. Albert Mitchell offered me an opportunity. All I had to do was ensure no one escaped the East Wing. You murdered my family for a business opportunity." Chloe's voice shook with rage. "Business is business," Andrew shrugged. "And now, it seems, we have unfinished business to conclude." He raised his gun. Aiming squarely at Chloe's chest, time seemed to slow as Nathan lunged forward in desperate protection. Samantha screamed, and Ethan, despite his injuries, threw himself toward Andrew. A gunshot echoed in the confined space of the tunnel. Andrew staggered backward, a look of profound surprise on his face as red blossomed across his chest. Behind him stood Walter, clothes singed and face blackened with smoke, his small revolver still raised. "Not this time," the old butler wheezed before collapsing to his knees. The ceiling above Andrew began to crack ominously as the fire consumed the mansion's structure above, with a tremendous roar. Wooden beams and burning debris crashed down, burying Andrew beneath tons of flaming wreckage. "We need to move," Nathan shouted over the inferno's roar. "This whole place is coming down." Samantha helped Walter to his feet, while Nathan supported Ethan. Together, they staggered toward the tunnel's exit. The heat of the conflagration pressing at their backs like a living thing, they emerged into the cool night air of the carriage house, just as a series of explosions rocked the main mansion. Gas lines rupturing in the intense heat, emergency lights painted the sky in flashes of red and blue as fire engines screamed toward the blaze. "Susan," Nathan realized with sudden clarity. "She'll have an alibi ready. She'll claim we started the fire." "No, she won't," said a calm voice behind them. They turned to find a tall man in an expensive suit observing them. "James Carter, Robert Mitchell's attorney and the executor of his will. I received your message." "Nathan," he said, "along with the documents you forwarded from your father's safe, I've already spoken with the authorities." He nodded toward a police car where Susan Mitchell sat in the back seat, her face a mask of cold fury as officers secured her hands with cuffs. "You're late?" Nathan observed dryly. "But not too late, it seems." Carter's gaze moved to Chloe, recognition dawning as he noted the medallion around her neck. Ms. Freeman, or should I say Ms. Grant, it appears we have much to discuss regarding your inheritance. As paramedics tended to Ethan and Walter, Chloe watched the mansion burn. The second time in her life she had witnessed the destruction of her childhood home. Yet this time, as the flames reached toward the night sky, she felt not terror, but a strange sense of release. The medallion seemed to pulse warmly against her skin, its engraved motto suddenly clear in her mind: Veritas incinere resurget. Truth will rise from the ashes. And rise it had, after 40 long years. 6 months after the fire at Grant Manor, Chicago awakened to a crisp autumn morning. The city had moved on from the scandal that had dominated headlines for weeks, the Mitchell family's decades-old crimes exposed, Susan Mitchell awaiting trial for the murder of her husband, the astonishing reappearance of Olivia Grant, sole heir to one of Chicago's founding fortunes. Chloe, now legally reclaiming her birth name, Olivia Freeman Grant, stood in the executive suite of Mitchell Tower, gazing out at the skyline her parents had once helped shape. DNA tests had confirmed what the medallion and recovered family records had suggested. She was indeed the long-lost Grant heiress, presumed dead for 40 years. "The lawyers are ready whenever you are," Nathan said, entering the office that had once belonged to his father. "Final signatures on the restructuring." Olivia nodded, straightening the simple charcoal suit she'd chosen for the occasion. "Where's Ethan?" "Conference room, reviewing the foundation bylaws with Carter." Nathan adjusted his tie, still uncomfortable in the corporate attire he'd once rejected. "He has a real eye for the fine print." A small smile touched Olivia's lips. Like his grandfather, Edward Grant was famous for catching details others missed. The past months had brought a gradual return of Olivia's childhood memories. Not all at once, but in fragments that coalesced into a coherent whole. Helen Winters, the housekeeper she'd known as Aunt Emily, had indeed rescued her from the fire, fleeing Chicago with the traumatized child to start a new life under assumed names. Whether Helen had known the full truth about the Mitchells' involvement remained unclear. She had taken that secret to her grave years ago. Together, they walked to the conference room where Ethan sat with James Carter, the attorney who had helped unravel decades of corporate fraud and murder. Samantha was there too, having proven invaluable in gathering evidence against Susan and the late Andrew Clark. "All set?" Ethan asked, his physical recovery nearly complete, though a limp remained, perhaps permanently, from the accident Susan had arranged. "As ready as I'll ever be," Olivia replied, taking her seat at the head of the table. Carter slid the documents forward. "With these signatures, Mitchell Enterprises officially becomes Grant Mitchell Holdings. The corporate structure reflects the dual ownership, 50% to Olivia as the Grant heir, 25% each to Nathan and Ethan as Robert Mitchell's sons." Olivia's pen hovered over the signature line. "And the compensation fund, fully funded at $200 million, Carter confirmed. "Available to any employees or their families who suffered under the previous management's unethical practices." "And Walter's care?" Nathan asked. "The finest facility in the country," Carter assured them. "His testimony was crucial in the case against Susan. The DA has agreed not to pursue charges against him for his role in concealing the original crime." One by one, they signed their names, formalizing the transformation that had begun in fire and deception, but would continue in transparency and restitution. When the business was concluded, Olivia excused herself, leaving the brothers to handle the press announcement scheduled for later that day. She had a more personal appointment to keep. The cemetery was quiet, autumn leaves drifting across manicured lawns and granite markers. Robert Mitchell's grave lay in the family plot, his headstone imposing yet somehow lonely among the generations of Mitchells surrounding it. Olivia stood before it, the medallion heavy around her neck. "I hated you for 20 years, she said softly to the silent stone. "For believing Susan over me, for abandoning Ethan," she sighed, watching her breath form clouds in the cool air. "I didn't know you were trying to protect us in your own flawed way." Among the documents in Robert's safe had been a journal detailing his gradual discovery of the truth about his father's crimes, and the horrifying realization that the woman he'd fallen in love with was the child his father had orphaned. His guilt had paralyzed him, preventing him from claiming Ethan even as he secretly watched over them both. From her pocket, Olivia withdrew the medallion, its gold surface catching the autumn sunlight. "I understand now that you were trapped too." By your father's crimes, by your own complicity, by the impossible situation we found ourselves in. She knelt, placing the medallion atop the cold marble. I forgive you, Robert, not just for myself, but for our son, and for your son with Susan, who deserved better than both of you. Rising, she felt lighter than she had in decades, as though the medallion had carried a weight far beyond its physical presence. Later that afternoon, the newly formed Grant Foundation announced its first initiative, a shelter and legal resource center for women and children escaping domestic violence. Its mission statement, inscribed in the entrance lobby, read simply, "The sins of the fathers shall not be the curse of the children." That evening, Ethan and Nathan stood on the balcony of the penthouse that now served as their shared office, watching the city lights flicker to life as darkness fell. Strange, isn't it? Nathan mused. 6 months ago, I didn't know you existed. And I thought I was nobody, Ethan replied. Turns out we're both somebody, just not who we thought. To new beginnings, Nathan said, raising his glass in toast. And old truths, Ethan added, completing the gesture. Below them, Chicago continued its eternal rhythm, oblivious to the decades of secrets that had finally found light. The city that had witnessed the destruction of the Grant family now watched its resurrection through the unlikely alliance of two brothers who had been strangers, and a woman who had reclaimed her true self from the ashes of the past.